Alchemists, welcome back to our deployment series. I'm going to show you guys how to deploy our Phoenix applications using Kubernetes. And I thought I would break this episode down into two parts. So the first part is how to actually build your application to a container. I realized that, at least for me, I had to learn this by myself. I didn't find any good guides at that time. And so I thought I would really take the time to explain how I do it. There may be other ways, but I'll just show you how I do it. And it's quite simple. So the first thing is that we're still going to have to use the distillery. Okay. We don't need edeliver because we're not going to be deploying it to a server using SSH. So it's going to be, a little bit useless to us. And this should be enough. Now the next thing is that I'm not going to use prod secret. Now the reason is that I'm going to actually be pulling things from the environment variables. And in order to do that, because when you compile, we're going to actually compile our application. And after we compile it, because this is a compiled language, we need to actually dynamically pull our configuration from the environment variables, which is how we're going to configure our container. So how we do that is that Distillery 2 came out with a new method called config providers. And I like to use the mixed releases config providers elixir one. And I point it to the release directory etc config.exs. And the nice part is that we can actually use our mixed config syntax in order to set our environment variables. So it's very, very similar to how we set things when we do compile time configuration. And you need to set an overlay. So this kind of sets up, okay, prepare this dialect or whatever to read this file. So when you see this file, I want you to use this config provider to read it in. And the overlay is how you can do some configurations by moving files around, or there's different kind of things. I've only ever done the copy one, and so what I'm going to do is from the rel config.exs, I want to copy that to etc config.exs because it's going to be looking for this, so this has to be the same. And what I have in here is the things that are going to dynamically change. So I'm just going to keep port 4000 for the URL for right now. The scheme to be HTTP, but I want to dynamically get the local host and also the secret key base. Okay, and because we're not dealing with a database in this application, I made it a lot easier for us to work with. And so, that's basically it. As you can see, it's very similar to how we would do things with a compiled application. We're even using the mixed config and everything. And also I want to make this clear too, we're going to have to turn this part off too. This I spent quite a bit of time on. This is the Docker file and how do we actually create our image. And I did this by myself, running off of how Bitwalker had a couple of examples. And also something else I did, I don't really agree with how Bitwalker does his tagging. Because usually OTP releases, kind of these minor releases, come out a little bit faster than the Elixir releases. And so I like to update as soon as possible. And so I just basically branched off of his Elixir Phoenix application. His build container. And I just made it very, very clear, so I tag it with the OTP release and also the Elixir release, so you know exactly what OTP and what Elixir version are inside this container. And we're going to be using, I forgot what this is called, but I think it's called a build type container. So basically we have one container to build our application, and then we have another container which is going to actually have it's actually going to have the application inside of it. And so something to know, actually, I don't think I did it in here, but what we can actually do is we can actually not include our runtime. because we already have it included within our container, because I'm basing my runtime container off of 2201, the Erlang one. And so after we build our app, we're just going to copy our Phoenix deploy app to here. Make sure that the default user who is actually on this container here can actually run this app. And we just run it, right? We run our app into here, run it in the foreground. That's about it. Okay. And I went ahead and I made a test.environment file for us to kind of play with to make sure everything's working okay. And so let's go ahead and let's try to build our container. I'm going to actually put this container online for us to use later on. So I'm going to actually tag it with what I call it, Plangora Phoenix deploy latest. Feel free to use whatever image name you want to use. And then we need to use a dot for the current directory. So our Docker file is in this current directory. And then we just let it run. Awesome, great. Now we have our very own application bundled already up, ready for us to kind of play with. So what I want to do next is I want to actually run this container and make sure it works okay. So right now, if I go to here, localhost 4000, there's no app running. So in order to run our app, we do docker run. And we need to tell which port to use. So we have container port 4000. And let's go ahead and let's use our local host port 4000. And I want to use an environment file called .env. That's what I'm calling this right here. It's right over here. And the name of our image, which I use this, Phoenix deploy, and our tag of latest. So you can see it's working properly, listening at port 4000 and right here. So now if I go to here, there we go, our container is running. It's quite simple. One thing I do want to point out to you is that I discovered this myself today because I never actually ran this locally before. And if you try to do Control-C to cut the container, it won't register. Now, what you need to do is you need to actually have another window open. You do docker ps, you find the container ID, copy that, and you do docker stop. And this will actually kill our container. So now we have an available terminal again. Great. So this is how you build a container with Elixir to get your app ready for Kubernetes. So again, I'm Alan from Plangora, and please subscribe if you haven't. And I hope to see you guys again next time. Bye.